Passenger tells the story of a couple who are trying out van life for a while when they witness a car accident one night. And when they stop to help the car accident, they encounter an evil entity. Now, I had absolutely no expectations going into this movie at all. I have seen the trailer a number of times in theaters before, and I did know there was some hype around this movie, but I didn't choose to really buy into the hype for this movie, so I went into it very neutral. Now, that being said, I thought this movie was solid for what it was. Not the best of the year, not the worst of the year, just solid. Now, for those who had a lot more hype around it and excitement, they'll probably have a different opinion than me, but for going in neutral, I think this movie was solid. But now for the door, I don't normally leave this door open when I film, but my cat has to stay in my room for a while in the bathroom, and her water, bathroom, and food stuff in here, so I'm leaving it open for her, and this will probably be open for the next probably 1 or 2 more videos. Now, going into the pros for Passenger, I really like the opening for this movie. Now, this is the one you pretty much see in the trailer a lot. Is the car alarm thing kind of annoying? Yes, it goes on for longer than it needs to be, but overall, I really enjoyed the opening. It's a very effective opening for this movie. One of the most effective horror movie openings this year so far. I also think the gore is pretty solid when you get it. Very solid overall, and the way they go for it in certain instances, very solid overall. I think they did a good job on that front, and I actually enjoyed the legend for what it was. Is it completely thought throughout? Not necessarily. Now, what we learn about it through the movie, through characters, doesn't entirely make sense how the first person gets it and how the opening works, but for the most part, I do enjoy the legend, so it is more of a pro for me than anything. And it did take a turn I didn't expect at all, introducing that element in the movie, which I actually liked how they introduced that element and how they use it in the movie. Now, going into the mixed, a mix for me here is going to be the ending. Now, I really enjoy the ending and where things go, and I can look past like the last second of the thing to help. I can honestly say I can look past that. Is it kind of convenient towards the end? Yes, but the CGI fire does take away from the ending, and it's just something that I'm like, okay, that takes away some of it. But overall, by itself, I like the ending, but the CGI fire does take away from it. I also think the look of Entity is very mixed for me. When it first appeared on screen, I honestly laughed, and my first thought was, this looks like the Grabber from the Black Phone movies, but very like aged. And that is the best way I can describe how I think of this entity's look, and it just kind of makes me honestly laugh a little bit. So the mix, very mixed for me for the entity. But now going into the negatives for Passenger, the first one is going to be like the couple's relationship. Acting wise, I think they did fine, but the way I feel like they thought their relationship like halfway through, especially with like Trouble, but the other ending half I don't think was completely thoughtful, and I was just left unsatisfied with where we got there, because we learned a bit of information about the characters halfway through when you think something is going to happen between them and then it doesn't happen, because at the end they kind of agree at the same thing when that was not brought up before, and I just was left completely unsatisfied with where they ended that. That wasn't completely thought out at the end. Yes, I get the situation and where that went, but I was just left unsatisfied with the relationship and where they chose to end those characters, and feel they should not be together. I also will say the jump scares, the predictable scares, isn't a bit creepy at first, especially with one sequence with involving a parking lot. Yes, but overall, they're not the best. And number 3, this is more of like a nitpick, but there are 3 separate times this is an issue. But the injury is not really affecting anyone towards the end. Now, there's one involving the foot area, one involving the hand, and one involving a question of how you're even alive at that point, especially involving a certain injury they had beforehand. It doesn't completely add up. And it's something I noticed after a while, because it seems like they have these injuries and it just starts randomly affecting them at random points. So yeah, that's not not a great part of it. That's comedic for some, but for me, it is a negative. But now we're gonna hear and talk about spoilers. So if you don't want to see spoilers, you can skip the time thing if I put it on here, if you're seeing this, and on my screen, if it says spoilers, I'm talking spoilers. You can pass that if you don't want to hear it. Now, the first real spoiler I want to talk about, let's actually talk about the injuries themselves, because you have the injury where she is kind of brought back and her hand is hurt and bleeding. And then you have the guy calling into the car and he has all that stuff in his legs. Now, let's be honest, her hand seems to be fine in the movie, except towards the end when she's driving literally into the church. It's like her hand starts hurting, but his leg, he walks perfectly fine until he starts randomly limping from the injuries, and it seems like that character was like, oh wait, I have an injury. And then he flies out of the van at the end and is still alive at the end. Having an open wound, open injury, you've not taken out metal in your injury, and he's still alive somehow from that. So that's just not caught up. And the relationship too, it seems like, again, we see them wanting to be together. We learn about her foster care and how she wants to settle down. He doesn't want to settle down, he wants to travel the world. And yeah, they have this experience that is very terrifying. And then with NT attached to them after all of this. And then he's ready just to settle down. When, again, at the halfway point of the movie, they have a conversation where you think they're probably going to break up, and they probably should, realistically, and they probably think they should have ended with the breakup. But no, yeah, they stay together, and they have the ring, so don't think that was as well thought of in the beginning when you have two different things you want to do, two different ideas of what you want your future to look like, and after one night, while being hunted by an entity, you're like, all right, you know what, I completely changed my mind on everything, I want what you want. They just did not completely think that part through. And I will say the signs to the church, it's not kind of all over the place here, but I actually kind of like the signs and where they work, especially with how they work with the legend itself, which is, we're given rules with this where the lady says, okay, you just keep driving and don't stop and don't drive at night. And I can honestly kind of like that for the entity, but then my question begs, how did the first guy get affected, right? Because, all right, we can't argue for his friend. All right, let's say his friend own thing. But how did he first get trapped on that endless road, kind of I guess in a loop like he experiences? And how did he get affected in the first place? Because he was just stopping to use the bathroom. So how did he get affected in the first place? Which is just something that wasn't, again, completely thought out in the movie. And he also can, teleport. Because he teleports her, where he, moves her arm like this, and she's about to get hit, but he doesn't hit her. So, it's not entirely thought out, but honestly, when it's the religious take on it, when you learned out how he walked with that, and how he's Satan, honestly, I like that. And I know I'm overlooking a lot, and that can not be great for people, but honestly, not consistent, but I still liked it. And the ending, again, having that kind of following the church signs and the car line, which I don't think the car line was real or not, because again, you do get them going over those bodies, which were not real. And I did not think they were gonna go that far with bodies, but oh, that was very effective there. And then you go into this very old church, and she rams him into the stake of that. I really enjoyed that. But then the CGI fire starts, and that takes away from the scene. And then at the very end, he clips this last technology thing for help, which is again a difference. They had him all the way in the beginning of the movie, of course. And he's like, well, I called for help using this thing. So I don't completely understand why he wouldn't use that earlier, but again, towards the end, I kind of see why you'd use that at that point, and I can brush that off. The main thing is the CGI fire and the relationship. I was just left unsatisfied if it wasn't as thought out, but everything else, the gore, I think it's shot well. Just the relationship and the complete legend was not thought out, but overall, for this type of movie that it was, even though with its imperfections, I kind of liked the movie for what it was, and where things actually went with the take, I was not expecting at all until it popped up. So comment down below if you saw Passenger, if you are going to see it. I know I'm a few days late on this review, but I was at Texas Frightmare weekend and I was gonna film earlier, but stuff happened this morning. I had to go take my cat to the vet. But comment down below if you did, what you think about it, like it, not like it, did you have any hype for it? Comment down below and let's have a conversation.